The latest Game of Thrones spinoff takes us back to Westeros with the adventures of hedge knight Sir Duncan the Tall and his squire Egg. Join us as we discuss A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, Season 1.
Yeah, so they told us going into this series that it's going to be a little bit different than we've kind of had so far. I mean, it feels like we've had a lot of spinoffs for Game of Thrones, but really we've had two. We've had House of the Dragon, we've had A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Now, for whatever reason, it feels like we've had so many, maybe just because it's taken 3 to 4 years in between some of the seasons here and everything, but it is a bit different. I mean, it's episode-wise, it's only 30 to 40 minutes long. We don't have these epic 1 hour long episodes. It also doesn't have the classic Game of Thrones opening. It's very simplistic with its openings. It's also a lot more comedic. Like, you still have some drama and that same flair that Game of Thrones gives you, but there's definitely a lot more humor in here. And yeah, it picks up following the journey of Sir Duncan the Tall. So we get to learn that he was a kid who got picked up by a knight, and he's gotten trained by him, but the knight wasn't always the best kind of guy for him. He taught him the hard way and the rough way, which included plenty of beatings and stuff too. But we kind of start off, and this is somewhat spoilery. The season's been over for a little bit here by the time we've got around to review it. So the knight he worked for, Sir Arlen of Pennytree, passes away, and he's kind of left on his own, not knowing what to do. So he decides he's going to head into town and try to join a tournament, which you have to be a knight to be in these tournaments and stuff. So he's kind of going along with a little bit of a lie here that, well, before he passed away, he knighted me. But it doesn't exactly go the way he expects it to go once he gets to town.
Sure, and it jumps into it very quick. This is a very short season. It's very truncated. It's only 6 episodes, so it's a very quick and breezy watch. But yeah, Dunk here, he does kind of lie his way into it a little bit. He's like, yeah, if a knight knights you and no one's around, are you actually a knight kind of thing? And if no one's there to really witness it. So he kind of plays very fast and loose with that. But, he gets into town and he finds his way into this tournament and he gets accepted into it. And he takes on, this young boy named Egg who, he meets in the town on this initial journey and kind of takes him under his wing. But eventually, as the show goes around and the early parts of it, you kind of find out Egg's got a little bit of a history behind him, and he's, part of a very powerful family, you learn, and it's a very interesting story that plays out, and you kind of have to wonder, like, where this takes place in the Game of Thrones universe and the timeline. It's set about 100 years before the events of the Game of Thrones series, and it's kind of like in between House of the Dragon and this in its timeline. Like,
about 100 years on each side.
Yeah, and it feels like it's right smack dab in the middle. This is around the period where, if you're a fan of the lore of Game of Thrones, this is kind of based on the story The Hedge Knight, which is kind of the inspiration for this show. But it's around the time where the Targaryens are the powerful family of the realm. They're the heads of Westeros here. The dragons are all gone. There are no dragons at this point. So, this is the point of, that's why it fits in and makes sense with the beginning of Game of Thrones, where, you have the whole story with Khaleesi giving birth to the dragons, and it's the first dragons in the kingdom in, centuries. And this is why, it takes place very clearly between those two stories. So you're kind of set around there. And what makes this show so different from either one of the two is the other two series, while there's some lighthearted elements and moments in it, it's very much a darker story, more cutthroat, more serious tone. And this one is almost the complete antithesis of that, because in lots of places it's very silly. But it does have, like you mentioned, it does have its serious moments too. But man, this is a fun, quick show that's very easy to binge, and it's got some really cool moments. There's elements of Game of Thrones mixed in there that you're like, yeah, this is what I love, that it's attached to it. And it very much has just that lighthearted comedic element to it, with some very, very graphic moments, some very silly moments. It still has those. It has those shock and awe moments that are synonymous with this show. And I won't spoil any of those for you here, because a couple of them are just ridiculous. If you know, you know.
And they hit you right away with them.
Yeah, they don't mess around. They get right into it with literally the first 30 seconds of the show, where I'm just like, okay, this is very clearly going to be a different animal than any Game of Thrones show we've seen so far. But I had fun. It's a fun story. Like, it's really good. It has some really, really solid moments, and this show kind of feels like it's going to be around for a minute because we're already talking about a second season for it. So it's not.
Well, they've talked about potentially 20 years. Like, they want to tell the whole story, which could have them skipping years and then recording another and following Egg as he grows up and goes into it, because you find out he's Aegon Targaryen, the fourth Aegon, which I can't be the only one who gets so lost. Like, I love House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones. I really enjoyed this series, but man, the names get so fuzzy and muddied up. Like, okay, your brother's Aerion, you're Aegon. Okay, like all the A's, all the reuses of the names and stuff. So it's good that he's known as Egg through most of the series here. But yeah, it has some really funny moments. Like, one of my favorites, and it's one of the most kind of just ridiculous. And I'm not saying it word for word for what it was, but it's a simplistic little scene where Dunk and Egg are sitting at a table and they're just talking, and Egg is trying to have a little connecting moment with Dunk where he's just telling about how people have, his brothers and everything, have put him down and made fun of him and made him feel like a lesser person because of his size, because he is a small, guy. And then Sir Dunk trying to connect with him, like, yeah, some people, say I'm stupid. And then he just stops talking. And you see Egg gears turning a little bit. He's like, and? Dunk's like, and what? What about people calling you stupid? Oh, it's none of your business. And just kind of bites at him, like, and it's got that kind of, get that silly humor to it. And because he's very awkward. He's a very simple guy, simple-minded knight. He's a big, strong guy, but he means well, but it doesn't always go well because he isn't the brightest guy, as that dialogue kind of shows off, but he's got heart, and he wants to do things the right way, and he's just trying to make a better life for himself. And I couldn't help but comparing it to, I guess you could say it's a guilty pleasure, but I think it's a better movie than what most guilty pleasures thought about, and that's Heath Ledger's A Knight's Tale. It reminded me so much of A Knight's Tale because it's got that kind of mixing comedy with the medieval drama, which, A Knight's Tale mixed in modern music and everything else, and they keep it very, here very much in tune where it should be, but it gave me that feeling because he's a knight that his knight dies. Both of them lost their knight, and they're pretending to be knights that really shouldn't be where they are, and they're trying their hardest to try to make it. And it just connected so much, those two, because I really love A Knight's Tale. It's such a fun film. So watching this just kind of brought me back to some of those memories of the first time I saw A Knight's Tale and stuff. But this was just it was a ton of fun.
It really was. And like I said, it's such a breezy watch, but you get along in this story here with Dunk trying to prove himself, wanting to win this tournament, like you said, because there's, incentives to win and, things like that, trying to get out from the squalor that he's living in. And it kind of deals with that, nobility versus knighthood kind of theme that's really prevalent in this, because obviously you have the very powerful Targaryens in play here, and part of the story is like the princes are missing and they're looking for them. Well, obviously we find where one of them is, and then, you deal with the other, Targaryen brothers and stuff like that. And you finally get, that coming to the forefront about midway through when you get the major reveal that who Egg really is. And you kind of have it jump off there because there's some very heavy tension between Egg and Dunk at this point. Dunk feels like he's been betrayed by Egg here. Like, I couldn't believe you were actually the son of the king, and you're this nobility, and you're presenting to me like you're this down and out kid who's poor and rough and on his luck, and why would you want to be my squire when you have this noble bloodline? And they really do some fun stuff with that story there. And I love when it gets towards the end of the season where it really deals into more of that dramatic part of Game of Thrones. Where
Episode 5 is definitely like Game of Thrones.
Heavy. It's the most Game of Thrones-esque episode where, he runs afoul of, Aegon's brother, and he hits him, and it leads to, you put your hands on the prince, you're going to stand trial for it. And, it all leads to this big night battle, this big battle of 7 is what they call it. it's like this old trial. It's kind of like trial by combat, kind of not, kind of, it's like him trying to recruit people, and some of these side characters that you get in here, like Lionel Baratheon is, you get the Baratheon names mixed in there.
He was so fun.
Lionel was hilarious. Like he was a really fun character in here too, but you get like the Baratheons, you get other people mixed in there too, and you get these people that come to fight for Duncan. Like he endears himself to these people that they stand beside him in battle, and they hold their own against like several knights of the kingdom. And this Targaryen who, despite the fact that he's a typical bratty prince, he still kind of finds a way to hold his own in a fight. And the fight scenes in this are really cool and really well shot. And I want to give them major props for the way they shot this, because it's not your typical just sword battle or something crazy. There's like jousting, there's fighting, there's sword fighting, there's hand-to-hand combat.
They're like flails and maces.
Yeah, they incorporate a lot of different things into this, and it was just so well done. That 5th episode really, in my opinion, was the standout episode, probably because I do have such a soft spot for actual Game of Thrones. That felt the most like Game of Thrones-esque episode in the entire season, and it was just incredibly well shot, especially with like the powerful moment at the end that you get where Duncan's down and Egg's yelling at him to get up, and you see the crowd kind of start to get behind him a little bit. It's really fun and really well done.
Yeah, and the biggest thing with that 7-on-7 battle is that he was one short. And he could, because he had a guy, but he got promised lordship, so he switched to the other side. So you actually got Egg's uncle, a Targaryen, stepped in to fight on Dunk's side. And that was really dramatic at the end of that. We don't want to spoil everything that happened at the ending there, but that 5th episode was probably the biggest episode of the season, because you had that battle, which you got to see a good part of it, but it was a very hearty flashback that showed you exactly what happened to Dunk, of kind of how he was as a kid, how it led to him to be with the knight and be in the situation he's in, that he's had a long, hard life. He hasn't had easy. He grew up in a poor town and, was trying to get out, but he wasn't able to escape the way he wanted to escape. And you got some really hard, dramatic stuff that happens to him. And then you get to come back after that battle. And that was a gruesome, hard battle. I mean, you got eyeballs and everything getting slashed and poked, and they don't shy away from anything. And I will give props, the armor and everything look cool. Like the Targaryens got much more dramatic armor in this one, because it's very much dragon shaped and has a lot more detail and more animal like with everything. Even with Lionel Baratheon, before he put his armor on, he's sitting at the table with a big crown of antlers on, and you thought he was going to be a problem when Dunk first met him, and then they become BFFs, and you have that going on. But the armors looked like really cool, and you got very simple for Dunk, because he's supposed to be a simple hedge knight. He's not going to have the big flashy armor and stuff. And again, that was more pretty much like a Knight's Tale stuff that, Heath Ledger's character had to go and get somebody to make him armor, and got the lightweight and smaller stuff, and he had to get someone to make him armor, so he got a blacksmith to be able to make him something that was a little more lighter for him to wear. And there's a lot of parallels to it. I know this story was, it's a lot different, but there's a lot of parallels between A Knight's Tale and this series. But yeah, just the biggest negative I can say about this show is that it was over with in 6 30-minute episodes. I wanted more of it. Like it did its job well of telling a very simplified, straightforward kind of story. You got flashbacks that gave a little bit more mystery and stuff around, but for the most part, got about 3 hours, and you got kind of a complete story that set up an interesting path forward for the next season. But I was having such a good time. I was disappointed that was only 6 episodes.
I was too. And getting back to the armor mentioned just really quick, Aerion's helmet was really cool. Like I really love that helmet that Aerion had in the duel. It was a really cool helmet that I like the design of, and the aesthetic looked really cool. And it was so well done. Those battles were fantastically shot. Just chef's kiss. If you're a Game of Thrones guy enough, just to episode 5 makes it all worth it at that point. But it sets up for a very interesting path forward. Like you said, you leave the door open for season 2, and it does, if you've read The Hedge Knight, the ending is kind of a a little bit of a flip on what happens in the book. So in the book, you have, you know, you still have Duncan setting off on his journey with Egg as his squire. So they kind of patch things up, and he officially becomes a squire, and they go off on their journey. Well, in the book, they get permission for Egg to go with Duncan, and that's, you know, them setting off on their adventure at that point. The ending of this season is Egg kind of sneaking out in the heat of the night there to take off a Duncan with no permission given, and he's off on his own, and that kind of adds a little bit of an element of danger going forward for them. So thematically for the story of the show, it's going to be a little bit of a departure from the premise of the book. Like, you have this whole situation now where he's going to be hunted by the Targaryens on his journey here, and what that's going to look like with them potentially thinking he kidnapped Aegon to go and be his squire. Like, there's going to be some fun thematic storytelling elements that they're going to have in this next season that I really want now, like, as opposed to hopefully not 2 or 3 years from now.
I think they already started filming season 2, so we shouldn't
have
have to wait past maybe next year to be able to get it.
I'm very thankful for that, because if anything, we've gotten used to Game of Thrones taking their sweet, sweet time in between seasons. I'm looking at you, House of the Dragon, which, thank God, we're finally getting the 3rd season of that. But, like, I just don't want that to be the norm for this, because it's such a fun story. You got to want them to move forward with it. If they could shoot it that quickly and get... I'll take 6-episode seasons at a time if you're going to tell these quicker stories. I'm down for it. If you can do it and do it well, which this show did, I'm for it.
It should be much easier for this show because they don't have as many special effects.
Correct.
Like, you have a lot of armor and wardrobe and sets and stuff to build, but you don't have the CGI for the dragons and the grand castles and stuff, because it's very much more about, while we have everything wrapped around the Targaryens, it's more about the lower people and the lower knights, and you've just got most of it set around tents and stuff that are set there with one main compound that they go in and out of. But it should be a little simpler. Like, it's still a big production.
Sure.
But it should be a little simpler for them to be able to get it out a little quicker, depending on what kind of time jumps they need to have. As I said, the showrunner wants us 20 years of it if they can get it all done that way, which, unless you're like right now, Grey's Anatomy or The Simpsons, you're not getting 20 plus years of something.
I would love a show that lasts for 20 seasons. That would be great.
But hopefully, because of it being a little more simplistic with things, like, they basically had one setting, well, 2 settings, because, I mean, he initially meets Egg at that inn where, Egg is very mischievous and gets around and kind of just bounces around and stuff, but the rest of the show was all set, other than a few flashbacks that gave you to that town and with Sir Pennytree's home and stuff. You were basically one single location for this episode. So if they stick to that, if they just kind of move to another town,
keep it practical,
another tournament, keep it practical, we should hopefully be able to get it without waiting 3 to 4 years in between. Because you think we have House of the Dragon in June, potentially 4 years before we get the final season of that, 3 or 4 years of how they film that, because it is a giant spectacle.
Very much so, yeah.
So hopefully that is something that can fill those gaps for House of the Dragon, that you can get this being kind of continuous every year, or maybe 1 to 2 year type of thing to kind of fill that gap in between those. And it might be the better idea, instead of, well, here's House of Dragon season 2, we have nothing for you for the next 3.5 years before you get that. But it was such a fun show. Like, getting back to it, Sir Dunk was such a great kind of character, because you said he's a very simple guy, not the smartest, but he's not dumb. I think that's what he tried to get across to people, because, as you said, the main premise is they don't fully believe that he was knighted, so he's got to get someone who knew Sir Pennytree to say, yeah, I knew him, you were his squire, you were here, that will get... I'll back you and stuff. So most of it's about him trying to go to different, knights and families around there and say, hey, he served you here, he served you here, he served you here. Will you vouch for me in this tournament? And he's having to try to prove himself, but it doesn't go well most of the time, especially the one that he keeps going back to. And it's like, oh, he's asleep. Well, he's asleep still. how is he still sleeping? Like,
I
after
wish
all
I could
this
sleep
time?
that much.
But it's really interesting how it tries to bring it down to a much more simpler level that you can really connect to a lowly hedge knight and a bald squire named Egg, and still have the Targaryens, which, yeah, as you said, with it being 100 years in between the two main stories that we've had, you do know that the Targaryens are kind of, they're in power, but they're kind of heading towards their eventual fate here, and that people aren't as happy with them and not as trusting of them, and they're kind of losing their hold of everything. So you're kind of in that really interesting place with them, is that they're not the good guys. They're not who you want them to be. And they're heading towards their ends. I'm curious how much past Dunk and Egg story that we're going to dive into kind of the end and the heading towards the fall of the Targaryen Empire.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept to see if they actually explore the dynamics of that. But I'm loving this adventure story for Duncan trying to, prove himself as a knight, and that's kind of the heart of what they're doing. And there's a lot of different fun ways you can play with that moving forward, and find ways to incorporate the family names that everybody knows, that has drawn you in as a fan of Game of Thrones, that have paid attention to this. But you still don't need to know all of that lore to really enjoy this show too. Like, this is a show that you can jump in sight unseen. If you've never watched 5 minutes of Game of Thrones, you could still get enjoyment out of this. Like, we're just connecting the dots from something we've already seen. You don't have to know who Daenerys Targaryen is, and you don't need to know who, insert other Targaryen names, or you don't have to know who all the Starks or Baratheons or any of those families. Like, you don't really have to. It's just fun winks and nods for us who paid enough attention to the lore and loved the show up until the end as much as we did. But you don't have to have that prior knowledge of it to get enjoyment out of this. Like, it's just, that's the fun wink and the nod for those of us that did pay attention and know. But it's a fun story either way. It's a very easy story to follow, not very complicated plot, which I love. I love it when it's simplistically done, because you don't have enough time to really complicate it too much. Like,
it allows you to live in that world a little bit more.
Yeah, it's simplified in a way that's very easy to follow, but still very well done. And that's what I appreciate most about this, is you can just go along and you get it, and you're behind him, and you're rooting for this lovable oaf who just wants to prove himself. And he's gone through, just awful things as a kid to try to get his way out of squalor and obscurity, to live a life of nobility that he wants to live and be respected and be well known. And we'll see where this journey takes him. I'm excited to see where it's going forward, because there's a lot of fun stuff they can play with and a lot of hijinks they could get into, and we'll see where they take it. How far along in the Hedge Knight story do they go? Where do they go and kind of take those detours and tell their own stories? We'll see. The jury's still out, but there's potential here for definitely a few more seasons, and judging by the reception that it got, it's been pretty positive. So I'm imagining this is a show that, barring a steep drop-off in production and writing quality, can stick around for a little while, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, probably won't get that 20 years, but if they can get 5 or 6 and run for a while, and like I said, kind of be in that in-between, they have other spinoffs and other things going, so this could be the more simple story that you can be just giving more of that lore, diving into, because, if you are big into Game of Thrones, you can be connecting the family trees to see where this Baratheon is and who he's the dad of, because with 100 years, you've still got a few levels to get to where we were down there, but you're starting to get more towards, back towards Game of Thrones. But I said you got 100 years, so you can do Dunk's entire story and still not even get close to where Game of Thrones was. But I did appreciate the humor. As I said, there was some silly humor, but it was done just right. And there was some really dark humor as well, because there were some fun things, like especially towards the end. It was like there's a maester who was looking over Dunk because he gets pretty badly beaten up after that 7-on-7 battle. And then Baratheon just dismisses him. He wasn't very good anyways, because he keeps telling Dunk that he's just going to die. And like, well, there's nothing I can do. You're just going to die. And they're both like, what? Like, yeah, he wasn't good anyway. So just dismiss him. A guy who's supposed to be healing and helping people, I can tell him, like, I can't do nothing for you. You're just going to die. Like, there's some good dark humor in it, but it works. And I think it works because our main character in Dunk, he does have that simplistic charm to him that you feel for him. And as you said, with the simplistic storytelling, you got to live in this world. You got to see how the nobles acted outside of a castle table, but you also got to see a little bit of that as well. But you also got to see how the townsfolk and every normal person is living and see how they're feeling towards things, but also how the Targaryens treat people. And as you have a puppet show that's been going on that has some fun special effects for the age, but it's about fighting and killing dragons, and that is a big problem for the Targaryens, who dragons are everything to them, and that's a big conflict, and you get to see kind of what that sets off and what that brings. And I hope we get a little bit more with her in here as well in season 2 and see kind of where everything progresses and goes with that. But yeah, it was just more simplistic, but still layered and complicated in ways. You got plenty of action, plenty of humor. It was just a good time.
Yeah, it's one that's very, like we said multiple times here, it's very easy to watch, very easy to get through. I hope they stick to the 6-episode format because I think it's a really good sweet spot for them if the stories make sense.
Yeah, I said I wanted more because I just enjoyed it.
And I want a series leaving me with that rather than, it did so well, we're going to add 4 more episodes, and you could get a little bit of filler that kind of thins it out a little bit. I think you get your bang for your buck in these 6 episodes, and I really like it, and I want them to leave me wanting more. That's what I want. So I think that's the real recipe for success for them, and hopefully they continue to, present these stories in this format because I think they really have found a formula that works for them, and it's exciting to see what they do. I'm excited to hear that they're already filming season 2. I want it now. I want it immediately, but thank God it feels like we're not going to have to wait 3 years to get another season of this, and I'm so incredibly thankful.
Yeah, so Night of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1 was a really fun series. It still feels like Game of Thrones. You've still got the big families involved with it here, but it breaks it down and gives you a little bit more simpler story. You're following a lonely, hedge knight who is not smart, but he's not dumb. He doesn't always do the right thing, but you feel sympathetic for him, and you're cheering for him, and you want good things to happen for him. It keeps you really connected. And even though I wanted more episodes, it was because I was really enjoying the ride and everything I had here. But I do believe that 30 to 40 minutes, 6 episodes is going to really work for this to be to keep it with that simplistic storytelling and everything else. I'm really looking forward to season 2, but this was a fun, at times brutal season that really fits well in between House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, of kind of bridging that gap, but also taking it away from just being about the big families and giving us a more kind of heartfelt story with Sir Duncan and Egg. I'm going to give this an 8.5 overall. I think it did a really good job. It had some fun parts. It was a little slow with its building with things, and it had a couple issues, but overall it's one I want to watch again and that I had a ton of fun with.
Yeah, I actually wound up at an 8.5 as well. It's got a couple of kind of grosser elements to it that I felt were just completely unnecessary as far as the storytelling. I think it's part of the shock and awe to kind of be like, okay, we're in olden times here. Like, here we go. Like, there's a little bit of that kind of knocks it down just a little bit for me. But I had a lot of fun with this. I love the story. Duncan is a real likable character that you really find yourself just rooting for here. Egg, I'm still a little on the fence on. I hope to see a little bit of character progression from him. He's a kid, so, I mean, you kind of give that a little bit of grace, but the actor that played him did a fine job with that in season 1, especially towards the end when you start seeing him really kind of embrace the Targaryen in him a little bit, and you see a little bit of that nobility there mixed in. It's like, okay, you've seen that he's had some training, but, like, it's going to be fun to see how their relationship evolves as they set out on their journey out into the world here, and dealing with the very real element of his family coming to try to hunt him down in season 2 and try to get him back in the fold. But I'm excited. Like you said, you hit all the points on the head. Love the simplistic storytelling. Love the pacing. Give me 30 to 40 minute episodes, 6 episodes a season. And I think you got a recipe for something that could be very successful for several years. Maybe not the 20 that the show creator wants, but you give me a solid 4 or 5, maybe 6 seasons worth of this, and you keep telling stories like this, I'm all in. So an excellent start to a really good show that I'm definitely going going to watch again before it comes out. And like we said, it's 6 episodes. It takes you a little over 3 hours to watch. Really easy breezy watch if you have like an afternoon and want to get caught up. It's a fun one to check out.
And there's one scene that you brought up with what you said about the actor for Egg that really popped in my head about how he showed how good he was really towards the end, because he's standing over his brother contemplating thing. And as a young kid, to be able to show a range of stuff in your face and your acting and stuff, he did a really good job in that scene of being able to just show you with his eyes and his temperament and how he held his body to really kind of show the emotion of that scene without having to project and do stuff. So Dexter, he did such a great job at that. I also love that he showed off on his social media that his school, because he's still a young kid, going to school, that they had book character day. So you get to dress up as your favorite book character, and he dressed up as Egg. So he went as his character. His picture was just like, hey, here I am. I'm just going to go show up as my character and go to school with that. But he also did something that was really just shows the character of the kid, is for a wrap gift for everybody. He built these Lego dioramas for Dunk and for George and a few others, where it had their characters and horses and a few other things in there, and just created those, because you can tell, even though he really shouldn't probably know the subject matter, just because of how adult and dark all of these books are, that he has an appreciation for what he's a part of and gets to be a part of as a kid. Seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. He did a good job in season 1, so I really want to see how he grows as an actor going on to season 2, but how that dynamic between him and Dunk. And as you said, like, he's a little mischievous, so he's caused a little bit more problems to still be sticking around and following him. So you're not going to have a nice and easy journey for them going on forward. But it was a ton of fun.
Tough road ahead for sure. It's going to be fun to see how they play off each other and how they continue to grow in the stories they get to tell. But Night of the Seven Kingdoms season 1 is on HBO Max right now. Yes, it's still called HBO Max. Who knows in the future, if you'll be watching it, what it's going to be called. But at the moment, it is HBO Max. Come check it out. Let us know what you think. Come to our Discord. Come to all our social media posts. Let us know what you think of the show if you've watched it. Very excited for season 2, and definitely thankful that we got to talk about it.
So thank you so much for tuning in. And if you feel so inclined, do all the things to help the show out, from follows, shares, likes, and comments on social media to subscribing on YouTube and your favorite audio platforms. All of it helps us out so much, and we can't thank you enough for all the support.
You can also become a subscriber over on Patreon to get each episode delivered to you early, exclusive merch items, and your name read out at the end of every episode. Check it out at patreon.com/we'll bring the popcorn.
That's going to do it for this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.